Welcome everyone to Easy Code Is, where you the users can determine what features I will be implementing. If there's something you want to learn about when coding a website, leave a comment and I just might make a video about it. Today we're learning how to create our login page, the backend, using PHP, MySQL, and jQuery. Using those three things, we will be able to successfully log our user in. On our home page, we're going to click our login button right here. That will take us to our login page. Log in with our test user. And we're going to click Login. Page is going to spin, process our login, and it's going to redirect to our home page where it's going to tell us who we're logged in as. We've successfully logged in. See how it looks on mobile? It's responsive, so it displays right below our image. And that is where we will be at the end of this video. The first file I'm going to open up is my login.php. This is where the user enters their username, password, and then clicks Login. We're going to scroll down here and find our comment that we left, server-side login. This is where we have to send the information from the form to our server. To do that, we're going to use an AJAX call. I'll open up my signup.php file here, and I'm going to copy this AJAX call that I used to sign the user up, paste it right under this comment. For the most part, it's good. The URL is going to change, however, to process login. And we want to pass along all the input fields from our login form. Our login form, right down here, the jQuery.serialize function will send along these input fields, and it will associate them with their name. Email will be associated with whatever the user inputs in the email field, and password will be associated with the password that they input. Then we can change our success function to log the user in. We want it to redirect to our home page, which is index.php. This is what will happen if we find a user in our database with the credentials they have provided. We're going to hide our loader, and then we're going to redirect to index.php. If we do not find a user in our database with the credentials provided in the form, the error message div will be populated with the message that comes back, such as invalid user, invalid password, and that gets populated right here in our error message div. The next step is to create our process_login.php file. We will head into our PHP folder, copy our process_signup, and rename it process_login, and open that up. The first line in here is our include statement for our functions file, which we will need. The second line here is going to try to get user info from our database with an email address, using the getUserWithEmailAddress function and passing in the email that was sent into the form. This getUserWithEmailAddress function is in our functions.php file right here. Opens up a database connection, does a select from users where email equals email. Then it executes our statement by actually adding in the email address that we passed in to this function. And then it returns us a user. So over here, we will either have user info or we will have an empty array because the user was not found in our database. Now, our if statements are going to be a lot different from our signup, which is what we copied over. First if statement is going to check for a user and an email address. We're going to do that by saying post email. This right here checks to see if we have anything in our post email field. If it's empty, we know the user did not fill in the email address. Next, we're going to check for an empty array on our user info variable right here. If it's empty, we know that we failed to find a user in our database. And we are going to return an invalid email or password. Next, we're going to check the password. Password is empty. We know they didn't enter a password, so already we know that they have failed to log in. Now, we need to do a little more checking than just checking for empty. So we're going to do an OR statement, and we're going to call our password verify function. In here, we're going to pass the password that was passed in, along with our user info password. So this password verify function right here is a PHP function. What it's doing here is it's going to take in the password that was entered into the input form. It's going to compare that to the user info password that was retrieved up here in the getUserWithEmailAddress. So if what they entered in the form matches what we have stored in our database, which is a hash, which is why I have to call this password verify function, then we know that the password is verified. In order to fail, we have to say not. Basically, we're saying if what they entered in the input field does not match what we have in our database, then it fails. And we return invalid email or password. And those are the only two error checks we are going to do on our login form. If we get past these two things, then we fall into our else and the user obviously exists and has provided us a matching password. Now, inside our else statement down here, this is where we're actually going to log the user in and make sure they stay logged in while browsing our website. To do this, we are going to use the PHP session variable. This will store the user's info in a session that we always have access to in PHP on any of our pages. And it looks just like this. It's an array. The first thing we're going to store is a flag, is logged in, and we're going to set this equal to true. So now on any page on our site, we can call this variable and we can see if they have been logged in. The next thing we're going to store is our user info. This is going to hold user info we got back up here from get user with email address. Now, by simply calling the session user underscore info, we can reference the user's info at any time on any page. Now, in order to use this session variable, we have to include our session start function. This is what our session start function looks like, and it allows us to use our session variable. Instead of having to include this on every page, I am going to include it in our functions.php file, since that is included on every page already. I'm going to remove it out of here, hop over to the functions.php file, and at the very top, we're going to say session start. Now, we have access to our PHP session variable. Once the user logs in with a valid user and password, they fall down here into this else statement, and the session is defined. We define the user to be logged in, and we have our user info, which is the info of the user that is currently logged in. And then down here, this is just echoing out our array for our AJAX call to read, encoding it with JSON and passing along the status and the message. All right, so I think we're ready for a test. I'm going to open up my index file, and at the very top of the body, I'm going to print out our session variable. Now remember, in order to use this session variable, we need to include a session start, which is in our functions.php file. So in our index file, I'm also going to do an include at the very top and include our functions file. So hopping over to the browser, we have an empty session array, which makes sense because we have not logged in yet. So let's go ahead and log in. Let's first test out the error messages. So if I put in anything here, don't fill in the password, and I click login, we get an all fields must be filled in warning message. If I fill in my password as well with something that doesn't exist, we get an invalid email or password because our user was not found. Let's test our user, t@t.com, which is a valid email address with an invalid password. It still fails. Now I will put in the correct password, and when I click login, we'll be redirected to our home page. Perfect. Now, if I put this session variable back in here and I refresh our page, it will not be an empty array anymore. Here, our array is now filled with is logged in, which is true, and all of the user's info. Email, first name, last name, password created, and the key for that user. That's all stored in the session. Only thing left to do is get rid of that overlay and replace our buttons here with logged in as the user's name. To do this, we're going to create ourselves a function. So we're going to create our isLoggedIn function, which is going to check our session variables to make sure the user is logged in. The first thing we're going to check for is the isLoggedIn. We check to see if our isLoggedIn session variable even exists. If it does exist, we need to make sure that it's true. Now that's not good enough. We also have to check the user info variable. So we're going to do the same thing with our user info variable. And it's checking to see if the user info variable exists in the session, and this right here will check to see if it's empty or not. If it's an empty array, this if statement will fail. If the array is not empty, we know it's filled with the user's info, and we can return true. So we're basically checking for our isLoggedIn flag, making sure it's true, and we're checking for our user info variable, and also making sure that it is not an empty array. If those two things are true, then we return true. Otherwise, we're going to return false. And that is our isLoggedIn function. Now we're going to hop back over to our index and wrap our sign up button and login button in an if statement. Here is our first set of buttons that display on desktop. Right here, we're going to start our if statement. And you guessed it, we get to call our function we just created, isLoggedIn, right here. If the user is logged in, we're going to display logged in as username. If not, we're going to display the buttons. So we're going to say login as, and we're going to bold our username. Thing left to do is make this username our PHP session variable. We're going to do our underscore session. We're going to call our user info array key. And what we want out of our user info is their first name. That's all we have to do. Echo out the user's first name. Session, user info variable, and we're targeting the first name. I'm going to put a class on here, style this up a little bit, log in text. So the only thing left to do is copy our if statement around our mobile buttons. So down here in our mobile only div, we're going to paste that. Even on mobile, we'll display the username, their first name. But if they're not logged in, we'll display the buttons. Hop over to our browser, refresh our page. Look at that. Logged in as test. Same font size and everything as our easy code is text. Back over to our home.css file, we are going to style up our logged in text class. All right, so on desktop, bring that font size down a lot smaller. We go with 20 pixels for that. On mobile, in our mobile media query, we're going to keep the font size at 20. And we're also going to put a margin top of 20 pixels. That will bump it down from the image, because on mobile, it's going to be displayed below the image. Refresh our home page here. There we go. Now we're looking good. Logged in as test. View that at 100%. Let's go down to mobile. Perfect. Zoom that in a little bit. Our logged in as test is displayed below our image here, so it's responsive. So we have created our login page, logged in as our user using PHP, MySQL, and jQuery. Remember to use the session variable if you want to store the data and use it across multiple pages on your website. So that's going to do it for this video. Like and subscribe down below and leave me a comment. Let me know what you want to learn and see implemented next. Remember, easy code is, and I'll catch you later.